Hi, I'm an Australian in Belarus, and today I'm going to tackle the very juicy and fascinating topic of sponsorship in Russia and Belarus. This is called sugar daddy or sugar baby, the key terms used in Western societies, but in Russia and Belarus is termed sponsorship. And in a nutshell, what it is there's an older man with a lot of bank, and there's a younger woman with a lot of beauty, so you have this kind of ongoing transaction essentially. So it's not technically not prostitution and it's not a relationship, but it's kind of somewhere in between, in this very large grey area in between those two extremes. So I'm going to give you lots of data. I'm going to tell you how many girls are doing this, how many guys are doing this, how much money's changed hands, how long these things go on for, how many sugar babies a sugar daddy has, or how many how many guys a girl is getting sponsored by, how it's different between Russia and Belarus. Remember, this is a worldwide phenomenon, but this is a Belarusian channel, so I'm going to give you a bit of a perspective on all the research I've done on this topic, plus a few of my own anecdotes. So last year, Secret Mag did a nationwide poll in Russia. They got 4,200 responses from Russian women aged 18 to 30, and 23% of those girls had either recently been involved in sponsorship or were currently being sponsored, right? So around kind of 1 in 4, 1 in 5. The year before that, 2023, there was another similar survey done by a different group. They came up with a similar result with around kind of 19% of women in that age range, 18 to 30, that were actively being sponsored. So we're looking around 1 in 5, which is quite a big number, right? You're probably a bit shocked by that because you're thinking like, okay, well, let's think of all the girls I know in that age range. And it's like, well, I wonder which ones are being sponsored, right? So, and of course, you know, there's obviously a big bias towards larger cities and girls who present themselves in a certain way, really marketing themselves, obviously physically and also via Instagram and other ways. So that totals somewhere around 3 million Russian girls doing this at the moment. So obviously Russia has a reputation for having somewhat transactional relationships already. But I would say that, look, the majority of girls who do this are a very specific kind of girl, and I would say the majority of Russian girls probably wouldn't do this. So I would say we've probably reached some kind of a peak. If we believe the 19 to 23% figure, we've reached some kind of peak, I would guess. All right, so let's talk about how much money is changing hands. So I want to talk about Moscow. So we've got somewhere between kind of $1,500 to $3,500 US per month. Yeah. Now this is kind of your entry level, your vast majority kind of situation. Now, when you look at like oligarch level, like, you know, really heavy hitting, super rich dudes, it can be between 10 and even up to 50,000 US per month, which is a hell of a lot. And that's often with a very nice apartment included, maybe a car, a Beamer or a Merc as well, right? So of course that equates to, you know, pushing $1 million a year potentially in some cases. So the guys that are doing that are obviously mega loaded, and to them it's not much, right? If you've got like several $1 billion, a milli is just nothing. You don't care. All right, let's go to Belarus. So Belarusian State University ran a poll interviewing girls from Minsk and Gomel. So Minsk is the capital of Belarus, of course, and Gomel is the number 2 city. It's on the far east of Belarus. And from my observations, culture in general on that side of Belarus is a little bit more kind of Soviet mentality, whereas in the far west of Belarus, like Grodno or Brest, it's a fraction more kind of European in mentality. And that obviously reflects the relative histories of the two. So you're going to get probably more of a Russian response in this case. So they had 1,800 students respond, female students obviously. And 14% of those were in active sponsorship at that point in time. So that's about 1 in 7-ish in active sponsorship. Now do remember, these are not necessarily representative samples. Yeah, the real numbers could be way less if there's a bias towards attracting girls who are being sponsored to answer the survey. So if the heading is, you know, sponsorship girls, click here, then obviously it's going to be skewed more towards girls that are doing this. But also the flip side could be true. The real numbers could actually be higher because maybe girls face a little bit of scrutiny, or they don't want to be associated with what they're doing, a bit of embarrassment, shame. But because the nature of the cultures in Russia and Belarus is less of this mentality of shame or dirtiness or prostitution. There's less of this idea there than there might be even in the West. So in Belarus, the average payment is somewhere between 500 and 1500 US dollars per month, and usually rent paid as well. This seems to be kind of standard. So the men, 93% of the men are married. That's interesting, 93%, because that's kind of basically all, right? Like that's literally, what is that? 13 or 14 married men to every one not married man. So this is clearly saying a few things, that obviously it's a status thing, and obviously the wives are probably going to know some of the time, at least, have a suspicion, and they probably don't care. Well, they care, but they'd rather stay with a man who has money. And this is what you see all around the world. The higher the social status of the couple / the man, the lower the divorce rate is. Now, there could be a whole host of reasons for this. Of course, the more successful you are in the world, maybe the better traits you have overall, for example. It's not just a money thing, but it's interesting that such a high proportion are married. The average age, or typical age, is between 42 and 58. So in the second half of the career, they've amassed a lot. They've probably already paid for a family. Wife is still sticking around by the looks of it. And they have extra money, yeah. And about 70% of them are either businessmen or high-end government officials. So they got a lot of status, a lot of power, a lot of money, and that's how they're living life. And apparently, just having that second woman on the side is a bit of a flex. Because like, yeah, I have so much resources. So they got like the side girl or the side girls going at the same time. Now in Russia, around 85% of sponsors are local, versus Belarus, it's about 80%. And also in Belarus, in that 80% number, it's just the data I received. There's also Russians included in that as well. So in terms of foreigners, the biggest pool comes from Turkey and the Middle East, followed by India and China, and then Western countries, and then finally by Israel and African countries. Women, about 2/3 are university students or freshly graduated girls. And there's two clear archetypes, right? There's two archetypes of girls. One is the pragmatic princess. She is really mercantile. She's cold, she's calculating, and she's got a spreadsheet. How much will this guy give? How often does he want to see me? Blah, 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 right? And it's very mathematical, yeah? Because the thing is, like, with girls who do this, as a general rule, they don't have emotions attached to sex, yeah? Especially the pragmatic princess archetype, this kind of hardcore Russian girl. There's no emotional connection here and here, right? There's none. So it's just like shaking hands. Having sex is like shaking hands. It's like, cool, I have to shake hands twice a week. This guy will pay me $5,000. But this guy wants to shake hands 6 times a week. It's more of my time. He'll pay $8,000, right? This is how she has this spreadsheet set up. The second archetype is the romantic opportunist. They're not as honest with themselves about what's going on. Yeah? So they're still kind of in that, mentally themselves are in that grey zone, right? They don't want it to be prostitution, but they also know it's not a relationship. It's almost like hoping the guy is kind of like more like an orbiter. You know what I mean? That's kind of in that lie to myself, then it's not real kind of situation. So what do men gain from this? Obviously availability, right? Hot, young woman who's sexually available. I mean, that's the big part. Of course, no divorce risk either. There's no, she can't take the house, she can't take the cars, the business, all this stuff that he owns. She has no right to that. So it's almost like having a business, right? You got this limited liability. And in a way, the girl is kind of like an employee in a sense, right? In that sense. And also some kind of ego validation, of course. It's a flex. And it's pretty amazing as well, just for a 50-year-old dude who, apart from money, probably doesn't have a lot, to be able to have sexual access to the most attractive girls in the world. So they're all things they gain. Of course, there's a chance that they get found out by the wife or by the government if they work for the government, etc. Also, some level of paranoia. My understanding is it gets quite competitive. So They're paranoid that some other richer dude will take their girl off them. So there's a bit of competition there from what I have garnered. And also some kind of emotional emptiness when it finishes. So I knew a few guys who were doing this in Belarus. They were local Belarusian guys. And what I saw was that the guys were a mixture of cold and clinical and emotionally attached. And I saw one guy who described to me, a guy I knew pretty well, who had several of these situations, and they ended up being relationships. They move in together, then they break up. This kind of like crazy cycle, replaying. It was kind of looking for love and validation, whatever, and it created this kind of really sharp emotional cycle. Whereas for other guys, they didn't care. Like one guy I know, really young guy, was in a relationship with this girl who's a sugar baby type girl, but it was kind of more a relationship, but still kind of transactional. And then after a couple of months, he's like, this girl doesn't love me at all, and then just dumped her. You know what I mean? So, and with he wasn't upset or anything. He's just like, oh, she's a bitch, get rid of her. So you kind of got both extremes going on. But in some cases, the guy can be kind of emotionally empty afterwards as well. For the woman, she gets a Louis Vuitton bag, man. Because you got to remember, okay, you've got the feminist narrative about prostitution, that men are exploiting women. Women only do it because of poverty, economic poverty, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, most girls that do this don't just want a handbag. They don't just want a car. They want the LV handbag. They want the Louis Vuitton. They want the the Merc. They want the blah, 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 heels and Botox and everything, right? They want the best and the most expensive material goods and services. That's what they want. Yeah, they don't want to survive. They don't want anything else. They want the best, the most expensive. That's their value system. Yeah, if you think of all the things you value, they value consuming expensive goods and services as 100%. Yeah, it's hard to imagine, but that's what it is for them. So they get access to this at a young age with not having to do a great deal. Yeah. Whereas, even most people in the West don't get access to this kind of lifestyle. They can go on trips. They can pimp up their Instagram, because remember, Instagram is, of course, a great marketing tool for these girls. And as I say, the majority of these girls that are like professional sugar babies or professionally sponsored, having sex has no emotional relevance. This is like shaking hands. Yeah, it's really important to understand that. So you have an accurate view on what's going on here. And also some kind of network access as well. They get known, visually get known around circles, and that can lead to other things potentially as well, including poaching by other men. And then what can women lose? Well, if women get caught and known as being like a sponsored girl, look, most guys don't want this. Although, again, the culture in Russia is a bit more transactional when it comes to relationships, so there's a bit more understanding, but most men still don't want to marry a girl who's being kind of sponsored, right? It's just kind of how it is. So I think a lot of girls know to keep that secret, but again, there's a lot less taboo about this, a lot less thought that I should keep it secret for girls in this part of the world. 71% of girls who are sugar babies reported feeling anxious or depressed. Now, again, feminist narrative would say, oh, well, that's because they're being exploited by men and now they're depressed because they just need food to eat, right? That would be the feminist narrative. Of course, again, not really true. I would suggest that the characteristics that led the girl to be open to that arrangement in the first place would also be consistent with having kind of anxiety and depression and whatever. Again, I lived in Belarus for 2 years and spent a lot of time in Russia as well. I lived in a student dormitory, bro. I lived in a student dorm for 1 fucking year. So I have seen all of this up close, right? I've seen it all up close. I've been to lots of parties, lots of gatherings. I just know a lot of people, a lot of students. I've got a lot of first, second, third, fourth hand information on the topic. And, the girls most of the girls doing this are cold, they're hardened, they just don't have a lot of emotion. Yeah, they're very pragmatic. It's like a business, It's like a business. All right, so how do they meet? 70% of this stuff starts online. Yeah, 70% is online. There are formal sugar daddy websites. There's also a lot of Telegram groups. That's where a lot of it happens. And of course, Instagram. Yeah, if you want to pick a girl who's a professional girl being sponsored. Some girls just maybe get sponsored once or twice. They just want an iPhone. So it's like how bang this Arab dude a few times, get an iPhone. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. And they never do it again, or they just do it a few times. Some girls, it turns into their profession, right? But the ones where it's more of their profession, or they'd like it to be, more to the point, these girls, it will show on their Instagram. Yeah, it will show on their Instagram the kinds of photos, the lifestyle they're trying to show, the number of overseas trips, the restaurants, the photo of them opposite the dining table at a 5-star restaurant, this kind of stuff. There's a real playbook. In fact, there are playbooks. There's a whole infrastructure online built around these online websites and Telegram groups that train girls in how to be a successful gold digger. It's actually called the Gold Digger Academy, is one of these famous ones. That's 70%. And then just going to upscale places. So just going to the best clubs, the best bars, the best restaurants, the best cafes. I've witnessed guys approach girls and proposition them. I've seen this just in cafes. I'm not really a club bar guy, but I'm a cafe guy, and I've seen this even in Minsk on Mark Street there's a few kind of nice cafes there. And I've seen this happen. Like some old Arab dude just sitting there waiting, looking around. Oh, that girl's hot on her own. Goes up and approaches, gives a card, and whatever happens after that, right? So it can happen in person too, kind of a 70-30 split. Sometimes there's actually a contract, which is interesting, that stipulates a different time period, how often they see each other, all this kind of stuff. Typically, meetings are between 2 and 4 times per week. 2 and 4 times per week. And that could include dinner, shopping, sex, blah, blah, blah. About 40% of these relationships, if you will, go for 1 to 3 months, and about 50% of them, which is kind of standard, go for between 6 and 12 months, yeah? And 10% are still going after 2 years. So you can kind of get a sense there of what's going on. In Belarus, these tend to be a little bit shorter. 3 to 9 months is average in Belarus. So how many sugar babies or how many sponsored girls does the average sponsor have? Men, 40% just have one. Yeah, they just want a bit of side action, a girl there. They're getting what they want from the one girl. Then you got another 50% who have 2 to 4 in rotation. And then you've got 10% plus with 5 or more. 5 or more ongoing girls. Right? And this is like, again, it's the king flex. You know, I've got 5 of these girls kept in different apartments in Moscow, right? It's a bit of a flex there. Sugar babies, it's a bit less formal. 10% just have one and then just stick to that. And there's an exclusivity clause in the contract. 70% have like a primary daddy who's giving them that retainer, that X thousand per month plus the apartment. And they try and hustle a bit on the side and get a few casuals, one-offs, informals, failed situations, and so forth. And about 20% just kind of juggle what they can and try and make what they can. Maybe 1 to 3 guys at the same time. So overall, you see there's probably less men and more women involved, which is what you'd expect because every woman's born with a vagina, you know what I mean? And as long as her genetics are okay, she's in decent shape, she can potentially get a dude to pay. Whereas the dudes that can pay are a lot more limited, right? And even if suddenly every Russian man could afford $10,000 a month, well then the price wouldn't be $10,000 anymore, it'd be more, right? So only a very small percentage of men can really be involved, whereas a larger spectrum of women can be involved with this. All right, a bit of a change of pace today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you guys got experiences with this and you know people who've done this or you've heard the stories. I'd love to swap some notes with you guys. Feel free to comment below. I'll lurk the comment section for the first day or two and see what you guys come up with. All right, for now, das Vidania.